Welcome to Musical Passions. I'm your host, Eric Kisch. This is a podcast sponsored by CityMusic Cleveland, and is the fourth podcast that we're doing for their series of concerts this year and last. And it's the first one that's going to be in video, a new approach for us that I hope you'll find more entertaining and more informative. And it's more fun to see who's doing the talking rather than just listening to it. As you know by now, this season's CityMusic concerts featuring women composer honor the 19th Amendment 100th anniversary, which gave the vote to women in this country. And now here to tell you a bit more about the concert and the season is my co-host, Jim Mehrling.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. It is indeed Musical Passions, a program dedicated to the presentation of standout performances of the world's finest music, presenting a special series of programs sponsored by CityMusic and more than half a dozen concerts featuring composers that need a little bit more credit and exposure, and that's what they're getting in this series. We're looking at some of the supporters of the CityMusic Cleveland, and the composers that will be featured will include on today's program Florence Price, Ethel Smyth, and Amy Beach to round out the program. And back to Eric now to introduce us to our guests who will be the performers at the concert coming up.
Okay, thanks, Jim. We feature three composers, as Jim has said, and the first one is Florence Price, an African-American composer, and the work chosen by the group, which, by the way, we are seeing today three members of the group called Pantheon, which is an ensemble that goes way beyond CityMusic, and today they are joined in the program, but not on screen, by Martha Baldwin, a cellist from the Cleveland Orchestra who's taking over from the regular, unfortunately indisposed cellist. So we have with us violinist Masha Andreini, you can wave, and Elizabeth DeMio, who is our pianist in the Amy Beach Piano Quintet, and bassist Tracy Rowell, whose instrument is in the background there, who will be featured in the Ethel Smyth String Quintet, which has an optional fifth part for double bass. The first item on the program is the Florence Price 5 folk songs for contrapuntal. I think that's right.
Contrapuntal for string quartet. Yes, you're right.
Okay, tell us a bit about the composer, who is a very interesting woman in her own right, and also about this work, which certainly looking at the number of performances available on YouTube must be extremely popular.
Definitely. Well, hello, Eric and Jim. First of all, thank you so much for having us on your program. It's a treat for us, and what a great way for the audience to get to know our program that is coming up at the end of January. Today, I do have a chance to talk about Florence Price, an African-American composer, a lady who was a fantastic pianist and organist, educator, teacher. I have to be honest with you, before we started putting this program together, I didn't know much about her music, or her life. And starting learning about her life and reading, the first thing that I noticed, we share something in common. We were born on the same day and both married lawyers. So I thought that's an interesting point for me. Florence Price, born in the end of 19th century, 1887 in Arkansas, and born into a musical family. Her mother was a music teacher, and she influenced her early musical beginnings. Later on, she got her formal training in Boston, where she learned piano and organ, and she took composition classes. And coming back to her home, she started writing music and teaching piano, got married, and later moved to Chicago with her family. And that's where her career began. Florence Price is also known as a first woman, African-American woman composer whose music was performed during her lifetime by, first I think it was Chicago Symphony, and recognized as a symphonic composer. So we're talking early 20th century, so very unusual for that time. She wrote enormous amount of music. I was surprised to see. And she wrote piano concertos, she wrote symphonies, she wrote 2 violin concertos, which I think after we're done with this program, I'll be looking into getting a score, and hopefully I can read her music, and vocal music, choral, and extensive list of chamber music programs. And one of the pieces we chose for our upcoming concerts, it's, as you mentioned before, 5 folk songs for contrapoint for string quartet. Actually, she wrote it several times. It's unknown the exact date when she wrote this particular version we're playing. She did write the quartet originally and named it Negro Folk Songs, and she wrote it at the probably early 20s. And then she redid things, and so final version, that's what we are going to perform. Each piece is, her music in general is very much relies on her roots, on African-American roots, and her cultural heritage of Southern traditions. And this music is well represented of that. And it's a collection of African-American spirituals. And each piece, 5 of them, is different. Some like hymn, and some very melodical and mostly kind of like lively flares. Her music, especially in these folk songs, are combining these typical American spirituals and Western European musical form. And she does it absolutely brilliantly, I think. And I think I can say that combining and reflecting sort of different cultures, or melting pot of cultures, and putting it all together. And she does it with absolute grace. And I think her writing is absolutely magnificent and masterfully written for the quartet, with complex harmonies and interesting polyphonies and beautiful simple melodies that she just puts it with such grace and charm. And I think that's why this work is very unique, and we're happy to learn it and play it for our audience.
If I can just make one little correction, the middle movement is called Drink to Me with My Eyes Alone, which is not really a Negro spiritual as such, but I think an English folk song. Mm-hmm. But certainly the title of the piece, 5 Folk Songs, is very relevant. And I agree with you that she uses an awful lot of African-American heritage music. We have time today to play for you recordings that feature the middle 3 of these 5 folk songs, and they are Omadal and Clementine, which I'm sure you'll recognize immediately. The next one is Drink to My Eyes Only, or no, Drink to Me with Thine Eyes. Mm-hmm. And the last one, a very short but real fun piece called Shortening Bread.
listening to the Chen Quartet, consisting of the Chen family, Robert Chen and Lauren Chen, all the Chens, and the performing music of Florence Price. 5 folk songs. In Counterpoint is the name of the piece. And we heard 3 of the 5 by the Chen Quartet. And let's go back to Mr. Kisch now for more information about what's coming up on that concert on the 23rd.
Okay, so we have now enjoyed the Florence Price piece. It's time to move on to the second item on the menu. And this is a string quintet, and we're featuring Tracy Rowell on double bass, who is our guest today on the podcast to tell us more about this very intriguing, grande formidable English dame, who was both a suffragette and a prolific composer, a major presence on the English musical scene for over 50 years. Tracy, tell us more.
Well, like Masha was saying, I think some of the composers on this program have been new to me, and it's been really fun and interesting to get to know Ethel Smyth a little bit. Although she was taught piano in theory because they were ladylike pursuits during that time, the family noticed that she started to get very serious about her musical studies and thought it was too intense and took away her music privileges because they thought she was getting too into it. At which point, as a teenager, she locked herself up in her room and refused to go to any family events until her father agreed to send her to Leipzig to study music seriously. And as a mother with several teenagers in the house, I appreciated that story very much. What I hear when I listen to her music, and especially to this piece that we're playing, which incidentally was the first piece that she allowed to be published. I hear someone who is very skilled in composition. I hear beautiful melody. I hear a lot of the compositional prototypes that we as musicians have studied in music history class. I hear strong rhythm like Beethoven or Schumann. I hear a lot of dotted rhythms. And I hear beautiful melodies like Dvorak. But I really feel, after listening to her and getting to know this music more, that she has kind of a unique voice.
Wow, that certainly is a wonderful introduction to her music. And with all of these famous composers being mentioned, I think you probably are wondering what it sounds like. So here is a recording that Tracy found for us, one of only 2 that we could find on the internet of this particular work. And so what we've got is just an audio recording, but Jim is going to enhance that with a few interesting pictures of the composer as we listen to the music. I think you'll be as enchanted as we've been with it, and I hope you really like it. So here then is the first movement of Ethel Smyth's String Quintet, Opus 1.
That was her Opus 1, the first piece that she wanted to publish and did publish, the String Quintet. And the performance we heard was by the Mannheim String Quartet plus one. Joachim Greisheimer was the cellist added to the Mannheim Quartet for that recording. We should mention that she became a dame of the English Empire during her career. And Eric, you were mentioning during the music to us that she wrote a March of the Women in 1911. She really made her contribution to the women's rights and women's suffrage movement, which is one of the things we're celebrating with this concert series.
Okay, Jim, thank you very much. And now let's move on to the final work in the program, and finally give our pianist, Elizabeth DeMio, a chance to talk about Amy Beach, who has been known for a long time as Mrs. H.H. Beach. She was married to a Boston socialite, and in those days didn't go by their own name, but by their husbands. However, after the venerable H.H. died, she finally came into her own, both as a composer and as a pianist. And Liz, tell us more about this absolutely fascinating icon of American music.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, she was a completely fascinating person. She was quite a prodigy as a child. She could play by ear. She knew songs by the age of 1. She could compose. She was composing by the age of 4. They tried to, much like our other Miss Smyth, they tried to take her music away from her. They tried to keep her away from the piano, but she threw a big fit and they just couldn't do it, her family. So they gave in and allowed her to study piano, and she went on to become a very well-known performer and ended up marrying a doctor in Boston who was I believe, 25 years older than she. And it was a happy marriage. In those days, married women did not go out and perform, although we think of Clara Schumann, I think she kept performing. But I think to keep up with the Boston social scene, she stayed home. And yet her husband was very supportive of her musicianship. She bounced ideas off of him, and he was very interested in her. So she kept composing in a very formidable way. She kept moving on, moving forward, and developing her style. Her style is really interesting. She has her own harmonic language. It's unlike anything I've ever heard. When you hear this music, I believe you're going to share the first movement of this quintet, right?
Correct.
You'll wonder, what is this? It sounds like, could it be Liszt? Could it be Brahms? Could it be Wagner? She became part of the Boston, I think the Boston, five, right? Were there five of them? Yes, thank you. I was going to say six, but I'm thinking of the French group. Yeah, Les Six. But the Boston group, among them were...
You're the Pantheon Three.
Yes, but there are actually six of us, three of the six. But the Boston group was, we know Edward McDowell, we know Arthur Foote, and I can't think of the others, but they adopted her. She became the youngest and was told by them that you are one of the boys. They loved her and they respected her, and that really helped her build her reputation as a composer. When her husband died, they were childless, so she went back to performing, and yet she took summers to work on her composition. She couldn't mix the two lifestyles. Performing, it was very involving, all the preparation and so on. And then the summers she would spend at the McDowell colony. There's a colony where I think it still exists today, where composers can go and just get away from all the hubbub and really focus on their composition. This quintet, she was friends with people who lived in Boston, great musicians, one of them being Franz Kneisel. And we know that name still. He was a great violinist and he had his own quartet. And I think there's a summer program called the Kneisel Hall, the chamber music program that many of our young people go to and immerse themselves. So they were friends, and she had played Brahms quintet with them. And I think that's where the idea of this quintet came from, was she loved that combination and she wrote very skillfully. But this is, a lot of people compare this to the Brahms. It really is quite different. And
what's special for you, Liz?
Excuse me?
What makes it special for you as the pianist with four strings? And as you say, there are some fantastic 19th century quintets in the literature.
Yes. Well, we all know the Schumann, the Dvorak, the Brahms. This one is different. And one of the things that makes it special is her piano writing is so good. It's as good as anything by Liszt or Chopin, or, she just uses the piano beautifully. And she also, I believe, tell me if I'm right, Masha, I think she writes beautifully for the string players too. So my guess is that she consulted her friends in the quartet there and said, do you think this works? And said, yeah, apparently she got along quite well with everybody.
Great.
And also the melodies are really interesting. You think they're very long and very spun out. And you think they're going to end, and then they don't end. They kind of twist around at the end. So when you're listening to this, I would listen for that. I think that's very special, how she treats melodies.
Okay, well, we're going to get a chance to do that. And as we started reeling off some of the piano quintets, looking at Tracy, I am suddenly reminded that the numero uno piano quintet that uses a double bass is, of course, a fishy one, the Trout Quintet. So, you know, the piano quintet history has got a very long arc to it. I think Liz has whetted our appetite, so let us then listen to the first movement, which has a brilliant piano part, especially the opening riff is very attention-getting, and tune our ears into these long melodies. And this is from a live performance in Argentina in 2012 by a group I haven't heard of. But when I watched this video on YouTube, I was really taken by the passion in the playing of all of the artists.
We've been listening to an Argentinian ensemble and in a live performance, as you noticed. And forgive me if I mispronounce a name or two, but the performers were violinists Andres Marula and Pablo Pereira, viola player Juan Manuel Castellanos, and Frederick Wernicke. How did he get in there? The cellist, and Laura Diane was the pianist with that piano quintet, Opus 67 by Amy Beach. And back to you, Eric.
Well, thank you very much to our three guest artists for this upcoming concert at St. Stanislaus at 7 p.m. on Saturday, January the 22nd. And the concert will be repeated for recording and streaming only on the 23rd at 7 p.m. And this is coming to you from the Maltz Theatre. So we have basically three representatives of the Pantheon Ensemble, which Jim is going to show you.
That's Amy Beach, the several ages of Amy Beach, whom we just heard, and now we're going to we're going to actually see on the 22nd and or 23rd. We will be hearing them, but this is the Pantheon Ensemble.
And I have a chance to introduce our group. If you see in the picture, our cellist Natalia Pszeniczna, unfortunately, this time she will not be able to perform. So graciously, Martha Baldwin, cellist from Cleveland Orchestra, stepped in. Mari Sato, violin. You see Liz DeMio on the piano, myself, Yael Sanamo, our violist, and Tracy Rowell on the bass.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for watching so far, and we hope that you will join us for the concert. Please excuse any glitches in this, our first video podcast, and if it works, we thank the three musicians who are blameless for any errors that we commit, and Jim and I are old dogs learning new tricks in the video game. It's been a lot of fun to do this first video podcast with you all, and I look forward to having you join us as we then do our fifth podcast for the next concert coming up. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you, Eric. This has been Musical Passions. Our program has been presenting performances of the finest artists of this and the last century for years, and this is a special series sponsored by CityMusic Cleveland of this special series saluting women composers. Remember, it's the Friends of the Orchestra who help support the orchestra. It isn't all from millionaire donors, but for supporters from the community. You're invited to do that. This is a special concert series. 2020 and 2021, the one we've been talking about, is coming up at St. Stanislaus on the 22nd of January and live streaming on the 23rd.
And we hope that this picture of a full orchestra will be something that we can again come back to before the end of this year.
We certainly look forward to that. Of course, quintets and quartets coming up this month. I'm Jim Mehrling speaking for Eric Kisch. Thank you so much for watching and listening.